thank you for participating in the Humane Summit, a virtual speaker series brought to you by the Humane Education Coalition. This session is sponsored by the Griffin Press and the Humane Society of the United States. We are grateful for your attendance today for Dr. Brian Ogle's speaker session, Promoting Action Using Interest-Driven Education. Brian is an assistant professor of Anthrozoology and the department chair for Humanities and General Education at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida. His research activities focus on instructional issues related to science teaching, public perception of captive wildlife, and trends in conservation and humane education. At this time, I will pass things over to our speaker, Brian Ogle.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having the time to be able to come out and join. I appreciate you taking the time to enjoy the summit, to interact with everybody. I hope you're learning and really enjoying your opportunity to connect virtually in this really unique experience. Today, we're going to be talking about promoting action in our programs using interest-driven education. And we're going to talk about what does this mean? What do these models look like? And how can we use it to our advantage to be able to really get that behavior change that we're really looking for out of our learners as they come out of our programs. As Megan mentioned in the intro, my name is Dr. Brian Ogle. I'm an assistant professor at Beacon College and I teach anthrozoology. So I have a focus on human-animal interactions, how they occur in different contexts, and then I have a very big interest in education and looking at how education, both conservation education, environmental education, as well as humane education, all come together to really shape how we view animals, how we interact with animals, as well as nature, each other, and how can we promote a better understanding and to create a more humane world. So I'm really excited to spend this time with you as we look at this idea of promoting interest-driven education. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight stems from an article that I wrote for the Green Teacher back in the fall of 2016, which examined this idea of combining humane education and environmental education together, really to take action and how do we apply that in real world contexts and make those connections. So we're going to dive a little deeper into that. So if you're interested, that article is available. You can also message me and I'm more than happy to send you some different resources and handouts that stem to this topic as well too. But that's where we're going to kind of start from this evening, is this whole idea of combining action and why action is important. One of the first things that I want to do is kind of take a look at an old model that has been utilized for quite some time. And one of those aspects of this model, and or I should say the pieces of this model are correct, they're just in an incorrect order, and so we need to look at that. And so there's this model that has existed for a long time in many different realms, and I'm sure you've heard of it before, where if you start with knowledge and you teach your students, that's going to lead to them caring about something, which is going to lead to them taking an action. And we know that's actually not true. And what the correct model is actually this. It's almost flipped and kind of backwards, in which that we have to start with action and we have to get the learner to really engage in something first, which is then going to prompt them to start caring about something. And then once they care about a topic, an issue, whatever this might be, they're actually going to go forward and they're going to learn about it. Whether that learning is independently, whether that learning is, instructor driven, whether it's small group driven or team-based driven, they're still going to pick up some knowledge, or they're going to be more primed and willing to absorb that knowledge and to take it in because they already care about it. And that's a really important distinction to make. One of the things that we know is with the old model, and part of the issue that existed, was that knowledge didn't result in action. We knew that you could teach, a set of learners. And when I say learners, I'm also talking about a whole variety of ages. When we talk about programs, we're also talking about them in many contexts, whether they're an informal, quick, programming we do as far as community outreach, all the way to our formal, structured lessons in a day camp model or in the classroom type model. And those can be for pre-K all the way to your adult learners. So when I'm talking very broad, I'm talking with broad strokes in this moment. So when I'm saying learner, it could be anyone. It could be a specific, small group of children you're working with or adults. It could be in different contexts. It can be a 10-minute, like I said, community, just real quick meet and greet, or it can be where you have them for multiple days. So this model works in multiple contexts, and that's important to know. And we'll talk about how we adjust that as we get going too. But looking at this current component, when we talked about knowledge, it didn't result in action. That's actually one of the big criticisms of humane education and education in general when we talk about informal education. There's not enough change, and change doesn't happen quickly enough. We know that's a feedback that we get, why we have a hard time getting funding, why we have a hard time kind of justifying what it is that we do as humane educators. There's not enough change. And part of that is that we're instilling the knowledge, we're getting the knowledge base there, but that doesn't mean action's coming out of it. There's nothing measurable on the outcome that happens, because knowledge does not automatically mean action. Instead, action leads to caring, which then leads to them, being willing to learn. If the person does already, kind of want to seek this information out ahead of time, it's because they're primed already. So they already have this interest, they already have this desire, they already have this propensity to be learning about this subject, to be going deeper into it. But that's the only time that we saw, that knowledge really went onto that different realm of them caring or for them to take an action, is because there was already something there that existed. There was already something there that resulted in. And at the end of the day, too, if we look at what we're trying to accomplish as a humane educator, we're trying to create a more humane and just world for humans, the environment, for animals. All that stems to an action. We need them to take an action. We need them to be able to complete something, to do something to make this humane and just world. So as a result, we have to almost start with the action anyways, because that's ultimately what our end game is. That's what we want to see happen. So how do we do this? When we look at the design of a program, and again, programs can be that 10-minute meet and greet all the way to the structured camp, is that we often have a solid call to action. We know that's pretty good. That most programs, environmental education, conservation education, humane education, do a really good job about putting a call to action there, that we're inspiring them to do something. We want them to go out and do something when they're there. The problem, though, is we don't train our learners how to do it. And so that becomes a big issue, because we get them jazzed up. We're like, yeah, we're going to go do this. We're going to go save the world. We're going to do this action. But we don't train them how to do it. That's kind of the end of what we do. We kind of almost end with that. That's kind of our cake on top of the candle, or the candle on top of the cake. Sorry, guys, it's been a long day. And so when we take a look at that, we really need to almost start with the action, and we need to train it, and we need to get them comfortable with completing that action. And one of the big things that we have to really look at, and what we have to really understand too, is that learners do not automatically know how to do something, and we cannot make the assumption that they know exactly what that is. When we say recycle, that's an easy thing, right? You need to go recycle. There's proper and wrong ways to recycle, and many people don't know that. You have to train them how to recycle. You have to teach them what is the proper steps of recycling. What is it that you need to do to prepare the items to be recycled? What can and cannot be recycled? And so you have to take it that step further, and you have to teach them, and you have to train them on these actions, and to be able to comfortably implement the action that you're asking them to do. Because otherwise, if you just give them the action and say, this is what you need to do, they're not going to know what to do with it. They're not going to take it. They're not going to understand it in context. They're not going to understand what is it that you're really wanting them to do and why that's important. And so training them on the action is just as important as telling them what the action is. Without that support, without that training, your action is meaningless. And so your call to action does no good. If there's so you can have a beautiful call to action, but if none of your learners go out and do it, you've wasted your time. Right? So you need to be able to get them to all implement this call to action, and it starts with training, it starts with teaching. All of your programs, when we talk about this as well, should lead off with the action first. We kind of alluded to that. So from the very get-go, that's the very first thing that you start with, is the action. And then you use that action to teach the information, to teach the content, and to get them to be able to go about with you on this journey of learning, to be able to do that. You should use the action to guide your content, again, whether it's a 10-minute meet and greet all the way through a multi-day program, and you have to train the action. The other thing that's really important as well is that your action has to be defined. You should be able to clearly state your action in a very short amount of time, in like one sentence or less. You should be able to define it very clearly. You should be able to measure that action, and the action should be routine and repeatable. It should be sustained. If they can't do it without you, and there's certain actions, of course, that, if we're talking about like a river cleanup or, something very large, that does take some people, and that's okay. But you have to make it to where they're willing to do it again. They're willing to come back to you to do it again. But you want to ideally make an action that can be defined quickly and easily, that you can measure the action and be able to get some data off of that. And then, again, it has to be repeatable. It has to be sustained once they leave you. That's the ideal situation, is that we're training a change maker that can go out and implement these actions without us there, and that they're able to go and do these, these actions as they go forth. And so it's really important to kind of keep in mind. And again, the measurable part is really key. If you're able to measure the action and you're able to demonstrate it during and then after the program as well, that's data that helps to justify your funding and also helps to justify what it is that you do. And that's hardcore data that you can take to potential grants, to potential funders, to justify why a certain program is successful. So if you can measure it, even better, and that's an ideal situation that you can be able to show pretty quickly, hey, look at what our students are doing. Look at what our learners are doing when they leave this program. This is the action, again, quickly. If you can define it real fast, they're going to be able to understand what it is you're asking them to do. And this is the percentage that are able to do it at this frequency. That's pretty big data to have. In order to get to that point, we have to design the action, and the action has to be definitely something that is achievable, and like I said, is sustainable for your community, for your specific learners, and relevant to the topic that you're trying to teach. Some programs we're able to do because we are meeting certain standards that exist, and you still have to keep those in mind. You still can teach action first, and that's one of the greatest things about this. I'm able to do this with my college students. I know individuals who do this with K-8 students. I know high school teachers that do this as well, while still meeting the standards. And so you're able to teach your content in this method, and it's applied, and the learners understand it better. So it can be done in multiple settings, and it can be done with the programs that you really need to hit these hard facts and really meet with what the teachers that you may be working with need to have. But you have to also make sure that it's sustained and it's realistic as far as the action goes, and you're using that. Ideally, when we're going about this, the goal is to demonstrate how the action is connected to the individual and to the local issue. So you want to be able to demonstrate how the learner is connected to the issue and to the solution, right? You should never present an issue without the solution or an idea of how to come about a solution. And then how the issue impacts them directly. This is a problem because we see this in our community. You could walk down the street and see X, Y, and Z. It impacts you because of these reasons. If you don't give them that connection, they're not going to care. They're not going to get to that next step of moving beyond just the action to developing that caring. They have to make it relevant to them. And once they take ownership of that, and once they understand that this is an issue and I can be part of the solution, they're going to buy in more quickly, and they're going to be more open and receptive to what it is that you're trying to accomplish with them, both the action and sustaining the action, but also learning about what's going on the back end. And then the biggest thing that I always try to do as well is that you want to design your program, your lesson, whatever that might be, with the action as a learning objective, and almost start with that first. That's your first learning objective. And you design your program backwards, right? We start at our end goal and work our way through to be able to support that action to make it sustained after we have concluded with our learners. But it has to be defined and it has to be written out, so that way when you pick up the lesson plan, it's at the top and it reminds you this is what we're doing. And again, if it is measurable and it's well defined and it's repeated, it technically is a learning objective at that point, right? It's no different than understanding a specific set of knowledge or a skill. So at that point, you want to include it as a learning objective and define it like a learning objective. And that makes a big difference when you go in and try to figure out how does this look? How are we going to be able to make this come about? One of the models that I use quite frequently, and I really enjoy it, and I highly recommend it, and I have colleagues in K-12 as well as in higher ed and informal education that use this. And sometimes we use it, we don't realize we're using it. And it's called action-oriented learning. And it goes above and beyond service learning. Sometimes service learning almost has this kind of a weird vibe in which we are completing an action at the end, and we're learning about how this action will benefit, but it's almost a predefined action. It's almost like volunteer work embedded into a lesson. With action-oriented learning, it's more free form, and you're focused on problem solving. That's really at the core of what it is it's problem solving. You're placing the action first. At the very beginning of the lesson, at the activity, whatever it is, the action becomes first and paramount, and then your idea and information gathering is then second, and it supports the action. And so it's a little different. Sometimes it's kind of, when we think of traditional service learning, that might be backwards, depending on what model you look to or how you define it. The other thing is that it's embedded in a real world application, and that's really important. That it's embedded on a real world issue and can be done at any scale, whether it's in your immediate neighborhood, all the way to a global issue. It has to be attainable. And the other thing is that you're simulating a real world environment and work-like situation in which you're teaching these 21st century skills that students need to know how to be able to work in the modern environment, the modern work environment. So you're simulating this whole idea. It's kind of exactly what happens in business, where you have this issue pop up, or this thing that you're trying to work on. You have your action first, and you're trying to solve what's going to happen. How we get through this idea? What is this action we need to take? And so you're giving them these skills in a different context that works really well. And you can integrate role playing into this very easily. And it's actually a lot of fun to put role playing into this, even to start off with. And that works really well with the younger learners. But again, I've done it with college students. What's also really neat with this whole kind of environment and this model is that you actually step back as an educator, and you even step even further away from that facilitator role, and you almost just become an advisor at that point. And it's really cool because you see authentic idea generation, you see this authentic kind of motivation, and the students really taking ownership of what it is that they're doing and they're learning, and then they run with it. And it's super cool to see. And you see things that they come up with that you wouldn't even expect to see. And your whole job is just to serve as an advisor and to kind of keep them on track. But it's a really unique learning model, and I really enjoy it. When we talk about interest-driven learning, because I know that's kind of one of the core components of what we're talking about, is that the student really is picking what is of interest to them. And this can be difficult, but again, if you're talking about an action first, there's many different takes on the action that you can look at. If you're talking about like conservation, for example, we use that. There's a human aspect of it. There's a wildlife aspect. There's a habitat focused of it, science, social sciences, economic, cultural. There's many different like perspectives and lenses you can take to look at that. And when you open up those different lenses, students can pick which one they want to gravitate to and look at it from that specific lens. And you can see some really cool things happen. And when they have the opportunity to look at an issue through a specific lens of interest, they're more likely to dive into it deeper, and then also look at the other issues because it supports what they're interested in. When it is driven by their interest, they are more likely to retain the information, which is pretty cool. And this is also supported through many different types of research and education, but the more relevant the material is, the more sustained impact it will have at the individual level, both behavior change, knowledge retention, and as well as to a continued commitment to that specific field. And you can even think about that in your own life, that the moments that have caused you to go down a certain path or to learn about something more or to go down a different road is because of the fact that it interested you, and that it had an impact on a different level and it was sustained. And so that's what's really important. And we want to get that with our learners, especially in an informal environment, right? This is a great opportunity to explore things that the K-12 environment really doesn't allow sometimes, and it really allows for some sustained behavior change, which is pretty cool. So a great example of this is with wildlife rehabilitation. I think they have the easiest when it comes to this model, because you have this animal that many times cannot be released into the wild because of something that we did as a human, right? There's a human impact story there. That action automatically, so we can create that call to action. Everything I'm going to talk about, that short amount of time I have with somebody, that 5 minutes or less with that animal, I'm going to be able to demonstrate why that action is important and how that action directly impacts. So now I'm creating an action they're going to start caring about because there's a live animal in front of them that they're creating an emotional connection to. And because of that, they're going to go forth and, hopefully be more receptive to what I'm learning, be able to pick up a few quick tidbits that I'm throwing out there, or go learn about it further on their own. So there's some really neat ways that you can do that. But it doesn't have to be wildlife focused. It can be human justice focused. It can be, environmental focused. One of the big ones that I know we have a tendency to shy away from and look at is conservation, because conservation can very quickly become a doom and gloom message, and we know that. But there's many examples of great success stories out there with conservation. But what's really cool with conservation, when we talk about an action-oriented program, is that you can make a single action that benefits animals in your backyard, and you can connect the story of conservation to your immediate neighborhood, to the exact same things that are happening in Africa, Asia, or South America. And that's really cool. You can explain this global context, and you can expand this global idea and this global interconnectedness through simple actions that you can take in your own backyard and really have them understand how they fit in the bigger picture, and that conservation doesn't just occur in Africa. It doesn't just occur in these rainforest environments. Conservation needs to be happening right here in our backyard. There's things that we need to be doing right now in our own backyards to be protecting our own wildlife that has a global impact. And if everybody did this, then all of a sudden there's all this great change happening across the world. And that's really important and critical for students to get. So in summary, because I know we're kind of butting up on our time, connect the action directly to the learner. And again, make the action relevant to the learner, relevant to the situation and to the topic. The topic cannot be too large that they cannot be part of the immediate solution. And that's important. You want it to make it to where they can actually make a real change immediately. One of the things I always tell my students, multiple times, they get tired of hearing it really quickly, is that, a flood does not start just out of nowhere, right? A flood starts with a single raindrop. A flood is a group of raindrops coming together and then forming this big movement and this big tidal wave, and it causes impact, right? And your raindrop, so what kind of impact are you going to have? You're in the middle of a flood. Are you going to cause a flood for good and move one direction, or are you going to cause a flood for, some sort of destruction later because of an action you took? So every action you take has a consequence. You automatically have, you contribute to something. How are you contributing it? And help to train those actions to where you're creating a more sustainable and just world, which is really what we're trying to do. When it's interest driven, your learners are going to be more apt to learning. They're going to take that action to heart. They're going to come back and learn more from you. They're going to dive into that topic better. You also need to make sure you're training the action. They should be able to understand the action as soon as they walk away from you, what it is you want them to do and how to do it, and communicate that. And then you should always strive to make sure that action is very first, not towards the end. It's not what we wrap up with. It's how we begin and how we move across. If we can do that, if all of us can make those actions put there, we're going to start seeing a quick turnaround. We're going to be able to measure that. We're going to be able to define it. And we're going to start seeing that humane just world that we're always seeking to create through our programming and through our efforts really come to life quicker, because our students are going to walk away having that training and having that knowledge of, I can make a difference, and my little actions that I'm doing just by recycling or by planting native plants or whatever that action might be quickly adds up, and I can get my friends to do it because I understand how to communicate that to them as well. If you have questions about any of this, please let me know. Thank you again for taking some time to talk about this subject with me. I'm really excited that you were able to. Enjoy the rest of the summit. I hope you continue to learn from the other speakers are phenomenal. And thank you for everything that you do.
This concludes our speaker session. Thank you so much for joining us. You can learn more here or by clicking the resource links in the summit. We hope you've enjoyed this speaker session and that you'll join us for another one soon. Please consider making a donation to the Humane Education Coalition to help us continue providing programs and events like the Humane Summit. We rely on your support to help create a more compassionate, just, and sustainable future through education. Visit hecoalition.org/give to contribute today. Thanks again.